The Baron's Runaway Bride. Chapter 1. The Empty Gown. The morning of her wedding dawned grey and soft, a fine English mist clinging to the manicured lawns of Blackwood Hall like a bridal veil. Inside, the house hummed with a frantic, joyous energy that Clara found entirely suffocating. She stood at the window of her borrowed room, her breath misting the cold pane, and watched a pair of blackbirds squabble over a worm on the dew-soaked grass. She envied them their simple, uncomplicated concerns. Behind her, the room was a battlefield of silk and lace. The gown, a masterpiece of ivory Duchess satin, hung on the armoire door like a beautiful, silent ghost. Its train, embroidered with tiny seed pearls, pooled on the floor. It was the most exquisite thing she had ever owned, a gift from her groom, and it felt like a cage. A sharp rap at the door was followed by the whirlwind entrance of Lady Agatha Finch, the groom's mother. "Clara, my dear, still in your wrapper? Mrs. Heston is here to do your hair, and the flower girl has already had a meltdown about her basket. We must keep to the schedule." Her eyes, the same clear grey as her son's, swept the room with nervous satisfaction before settling on Clara. "Are you well, child? You look pale." Clara forced a smile. "Just the nerves, my lady. A little overwhelmed." Of course, all brides are. But Leo is waiting, and you wouldn't keep the Baron waiting, would you?" She gave a little trill of a laugh. "Now sit. Let's make you beautiful." Clara submitted to the fussing, the pinning, and the powdering. As Lady Agatha chattered on about the bishop, the menu for the wedding breakfast, and the shocking hat her cousin Beatrice had chosen to wear, Clara's mind was a maelstrom of its own. The face that looked back at her from the mirror was a stranger's, wide cornflower blue eyes shadowed with secrets, a delicate mouth that was learning to lie. Her thoughts weren't on the vows she would take, but on the letter she had intercepted 3 days prior. It had been addressed to her uncle, Percival Graves, but the footman, new and confused, had brought it to her by mistake. The heavy cream paper and the embossed crest of a London moneylender had made her blood run cold. The contents had made it freeze. "Your grace period expires on the 15th. The full sum of £12,000, plus interest, is now due. Should payment not be received by noon, we shall be left with no alternative but to seek legal recourse against the estate of the late Viscount Ashby, with all the attendant public scandal such an action would entail. We trust you will make the necessary arrangements. The 15th, today." Her father, the late Viscount Ashby, had died 3 years ago, leaving behind a mountain of debts and a legacy of poor management. Her uncle, appointed guardian of both Clara and the dwindling estate, had promised to set things right. He had promised a lot of things. He had promised her a future, a good match, a life free from the shame of her father's failures. He had delivered her to Leo Finch, the new Baron of Blackwood, as if she were a prize thoroughbred being led to auction. The full sum, £12,000. It was an astronomical amount, more than the Ashby estate was worth. And Clara, with a chill of terrible clarity, understood. This was why the engagement had been so swiftly arranged, why Uncle Percival had pushed for the marriage with unseemly haste. It wasn't about her happiness, or even about a strategic alliance. It was a transaction. Leo's money would settle the debt, and her uncle would be free and clear. She was the payment. The thought of Leo brought a different kind of pain. Leo, who was kind and steady, and looked at her as if she were made of moonlight. He was not part of this conspiracy. He was its unsuspecting victim. How could she bind him to a family so steeped in deceit and ruin? How could she let his name, his honour, be dragged through the mud when the creditors inevitably came knocking, not just for money but for answers? She would be bringing him nothing but a dowry of disaster. The thought solidified into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She couldn't do it. She couldn't stand at the altar and swear to love and honour him while knowingly trapping him in her family's sordid web. It would poison everything. By 11 o'clock, the house had descended into a final, frantic chaos. Lady Agatha had rushed off to supervise the placement of the flowers in the chapel. The maid, convinced Clara needed a restorative cup of tea, had gone to the kitchens. Clara was alone. She looked at the gown. Then she looked at the simple walking dress she had arrived in, still hanging in the wardrobe. Its sturdy wool and practical buttons were an answer to a prayer. Moving with a calmness that surprised her, she stripped off the silken wrapper and pulled on the dress. She exchanged her delicate dancing slippers for a pair of sturdy half-boots. She grabbed her warmest cloak from the back of the chair. Her eyes fell upon a small watercolour on the dressing table, a painting of Blackwood Hall Leo had given her as an engagement present. She thought of his smile, the warmth in his eyes. A sob caught in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This was the only way to protect him. She took a piece of the heavy cream writing paper from the desk, and with a hand that trembled only slightly, wrote a single line. "Forgive me. I cannot marry you. It is for the best. Do not look for me. C." She left the note on the pillow where the bridal wreath was meant to rest. Slipping out of the servants' door at the end of the hall, she descended a narrow, twisting staircase and emerged into the kitchen garden. The mist was thicker here, a damp grey blanket that swallowed the world. She skirted the edge of the lawn and slipped through a small gate into the woods beyond. She had no plan, no destination. Only the blind, desperate instinct to flee. To protect him from her uncle, from the ruin that was her inheritance. An hour later, the calm, collected Leo Finch stood at the altar of the village chapel, a smile playing on his lips. He adjusted his cravat for the 100th time, his heart thrumming a steady, happy rhythm. The organist began the first notes of the processional. The congregation rose, faces turned towards the back of the church with expectant smiles. The doors remained closed. The opening bars of music faded, were repeated, and faded again. A ripple of confused murmurs went through the crowd. Lady Agatha, seated in the front pew, turned a stricken face towards her son. Leo's smile had vanished, replaced by a furrow of deep concern. He strode down the aisle and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Outside, the gravel drive was empty. A single, dishevelled-looking stable boy came running from the direction of the hall, his face pale. "My lord," he panted, skidding to a halt. "My lord, it's Miss Clara. She's gone. Her maid found this." He thrust a piece of paper into Leo's hand. Leo read the single line, his world tilting on its axis. For the best. How could this possibly be for the best? Chapter 2. The Wound in the Stone. The search began immediately, a chaotic symphony of shouted orders and neighing horses. Leo, his jaw set in a hard line of grim determination, led the first party himself. They combed the woods, the lanes, the tenant farms. They rode to the village and questioned everyone they met. But Clara Ashby had vanished into the grey morning, as if she had never existed. By nightfall, they had found nothing. Leo returned to Blackwood Hall, his fine clothes streaked with mud and his heart a lead weight in his chest. His mother met him in the grand entrance hall, her face creased with worry. "Anything, Leo?" He shook his head curtly, handing his gloves and riding crop to a waiting footman. He barely registered the other man in the hall until the figure stepped forward. It was Percival Graves, Clara's uncle. He was a tall, fleshy man with a florid complexion and small, restless eyes that never seemed to settle on anything for long. "Baron Finch," Graves said, his voice a mixture of bluster and oily concern. "This is a shocking, a terrible business. My niece, the flighty girl. I am mortified beyond words. To put you and your esteemed family through this, I can only apologize." Leo looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than concern for Clara crossed his mind. The man's distress seemed performative, his words too polished. Her note said it was for the best, Leo stated, his voice flat. Do you have any notion what she meant by that? Graves's eyes darted away. The nerves of a bride, my lord. A delicate constitution. Her mother was the same, prone to fancies and panics. She will have taken herself off to a friend's house, perhaps. We shall receive word in the morning, I am sure of it. He let out a sigh that was meant to sound paternal. The imagination of a young girl can be a terrible thing. Leo wasn't convinced. It didn't feel like a fancy. It felt like a flight. But he was too exhausted, too raw to argue. He simply nodded and turned away, climbing the stairs to his room, leaving Percival Graves standing alone in the echoing hall, a faint, satisfied smile touching the corner of his lips. The search continued for 2 more days, its scope widening, its hope diminishing. On the 3rd day, the answer came from an unexpected source. A grizzled old gamekeeper named Thorne, who had worked the Blackwood lands for 50 years, presented himself at the hall. He refused to speak to anyone but the Baron. My lord, he said, twisting his cap in his gnarled hands, I know you've been looking for the young lady. I was out on the north edge of the estate yesterday, checking the boundary wall near the old abbey ruins. Heard a sound. Thought it was a wounded animal at first, a fox maybe, but then I saw a bit of cloth caught on a bramble. Blue wool it was. Leo leaned forward, his heart suddenly pounding. Go on. Followed the sound to the old chapter house, the one with the collapsed roof. She was in there, my lord, Miss Ashby. Curled up in a corner, out of the wind. She was in a bad way, feverish. Her ankle was swollen up like a melon, looked like a bad twist, maybe a break. She must have taken a fall in the dark. Is she alive? Leo's voice was barely a whisper. Aye, my lord. I carried her back to my cottage. My wife's with her now. Sent my boy for the doctor straight away. Leo didn't wait to hear more. He was out of his chair and shouting for his horse to be saddled before Thorne had even finished his sentence. The ride to Thorne's cottage was a blur of hedgerows and hurtling fields. He threw the reins to a startled groom and burst through the cottage door. It was dim and warm inside, smelling of herbs and wood smoke. On a narrow bed by the fire lay Clara. Her face was as pale as the linen on the pillow, her dark hair a tangled mess around her shoulders. One ankle was propped on a cushion, swathed in rough bandages. Her eyes were closed, her lashes dark smudges on her cheeks. She looked impossibly fragile, a porcelain doll that had been dropped and carelessly put back together. Mrs. Thorne, a stout, motherly woman, rose from a chair by the bed. My lord, she whispered, bobbing a curtsy. The doctor's been. He's set her ankle best he can, says it's a bad sprain, not a break, thank the Lord. The fever's from the chill and the fright. He's left a draught. She's been asleep for a few hours now. Leo moved to the bedside, his boots heavy on the flagstone floor. He sank into the chair Mrs. Thorne had just vacated and simply looked at her. Anger, relief, confusion, a torrent of emotions he couldn't name washed over him. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was hot and dry in his. As if his touch were a key, her eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with fever for a moment, unfocused. Then they found his face, and in them he saw not fear, but a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. Leo? Her voice was a dry croak. You shouldn't. You're here. Of course I'm here, he said, his own voice rough with emotion. Clara, what happened? Why did you run? Did someone hurt you? Was it your uncle? At the mention of her uncle, a flicker of pure terror crossed her face. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held it firm. No, you mustn't. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, he pleaded, his grey eyes intense. Help me understand. A shuddering breath escaped her. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over, tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. The story came out in fragments, between sobs and shivers. The intercepted letter, the debt of £12,000, the moneylender's threat, the terrible realization that her marriage to him was nothing but a settlement, a way for her uncle to use Leo's wealth to erase his own crimes. "I couldn't let him do it," she finished, her voice a threadbare whisper. "I couldn't let him drag you into our shame. I thought if I disappeared, the scandal would be mine alone. The wedding would be cooled off. Your name, your honor, would be safe. It was the only way to protect you." Leo listened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and then to a cold, simmering fury that was directed not at her, but at the man who had done this to her. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. "You foolish, brave, wonderful girl," he murmured against her skin. "You tried to save me from a danger I didn't even know existed." He stayed with her until the doctor returned and assured him she was out of danger, needing only rest and care. As he finally rode back to Blackwood Hall in the gathering dusk, his mind was not on the abandoned wedding, but on the man who had orchestrated it all, Percival Graves. He was still a guest under Leo's own roof, and Leo was determined to have the truth from him before the night was through. Chapter 3. The Uncle's Game. Leo found Percival Graves in the library, a glass of excellent brandy in his hand, warming his feet by the fire. He looked the picture of complacent ease. He rose as Leo entered, his face arranging itself into a mask of practiced concern. "Baron, any news? Any word of my poor wayward niece?" Leo closed the door behind him with a soft but definitive click. He didn't answer. He simply walked to the sideboard, poured himself a glass of the same brandy, and took a long, slow sip, his grey eyes fixed on Graves the entire time. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Leo spoke, his voice calm and measured. "She's been found, Mr. Graves. She's alive." Graves's face split into a wide, theatrical smile. "Thank heavens, a blessing! Where was the silly chit? Herring off to London, I'll be bound, with some romantic notion or other." "She was in the ruins of the old abbey," Leo interrupted, his tone never changing. "Injured, ill, terrified." The smile faltered. "Good God, how dreadful! But she is recovering, I trust. I must go to her at once, offer my uncle's comfort." "No." The single word was a wall. "You will not go near her. You will not speak to her. You will sit in that chair, and you will listen to me." Graves's florid complexion paled slightly. He sank back into his chair, his eyes darting nervously towards the door. "My lord, this is most irregular. I am her guardian, her only living relative. I have a right—" "You have a right to nothing," Leo said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Clara told me everything. The debt to the London moneylender, £12,000, the threats against the Ashby estate, the convenient, hasty marriage you arranged for her to me." The colour completely drained from Graves's face, leaving it a waxy, sickly yellow. I don't know what she told you, but the girl is feverish, delirious. Her imagination, I told you." "Her imagination is the only honest thing in this room," Leo cut him off, stepping closer. "Did you think I would not find out? Did you think I would simply hand over a settlement, pay off your debts and never question a thing? That my family's name, my honour, was something to be bought and paid for to cover your thieving tracks?" Graves shot to his feet, his bluster returning. "How dare you? I am a gentleman. You cannot speak to me this way in my own niece's fiancé's house. The marriage was a good match, a proper match. The debts, they were my brother's doing, not mine. I was merely trying to protect the family name." "By selling your niece to the highest bidder?" Leo's voice was like a whip crack. "You manipulated her. You lied to me by omission, and you drove a terrified young woman to risk her life in the wilderness rather than face a future with you. That is not a gentleman. That is a coward and a parasite. Graves took a step back, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and rage. You have no proof of anything. It's her word against mine, a hysterical girl's word. Oh, I intend to get proof, Leo said, a grim smile playing on his lips. He had been thinking about this on the ride home. I will start by writing to that moneylender myself. I will inform him that the marriage is off, and that the Viscount Ashby's estate is now solely the concern of its current guardian, one Percival Graves. I will also make it very clear that the new Baron of Blackwood has a deep and abiding interest in the matter, and will be watching its resolution with great attention. The hounds of debt you set loose, Mr. Graves, will soon be snapping at your own heels. Graves's jaw dropped. The full, horrifying implication of Leo's words crashed down upon him. Without Leo's money, the debt was his and his alone. The moneylender, knowing the Baron was watching, would show no mercy. He would lose everything, his reputation, his standing, his freedom. All of it would be swallowed by the pit he had dug for his niece. You can't, he stammered. Think of the scandal. Think of Clara. Her name will be dragged through the mud along with mine. The only scandal will be yours, Leo said, his voice cold and final. Clara will be under my protection. Her name will be unsullied. As for you, you will leave Blackwood Hall tonight. You will return to London and face the consequences of your actions. And if you ever attempt to contact Clara again, or spread a single word against her, I will personally ensure that every magistrate, every gentleman, and every gossip in England knows you for the swindling, black-hearted villain you are. Now get out of my house. For a long moment, Graves stood frozen, his face a canvas of impotent fury and dawning terror. He looked at the tall, resolute figure of the Baron, saw the unyielding steel in his grey eyes, and knew he was beaten. Without another word, he threw what was left of his brandy into the fire, where it hissed and flared, and stalked from the room. Leo let out a long, shaky breath. The immediate threat was gone. But the damage was done. He walked to the window and stared out into the night, his thoughts turning back to the fragile girl in the gamekeeper's cottage. The path ahead was far from clear, but for the first time in 3 days, he felt he was on the right one. The next morning, he returned to the cottage. Clara was awake, her fever gone, though she was still pale and weak. He sat with her, holding her hand, and told her what had happened. He told her of his confrontation with her uncle, of the threat he had made, of the man's expulsion. Clara listened, a slow light of wonder dawning in her eyes. You sent him away, but the debt. He'll be ruined. He will be held accountable for his own actions, Leo said firmly. As he should be. This is not your burden, Clara. It never was. Tears filled her eyes again, but these were different. They were tears of relief, of release. I am so sorry, Leo, for all of it. For the shame I've brought on you, for running. I thought I was doing the right thing. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his cheek. You were trying to protect me. It was the most noble, the most foolish, and the most wonderful thing anyone has ever done for me. He looked into her blue eyes. When you are well, we have much to discuss. But know this, I did not fall in love with the niece of a respectable gentleman. I fell in love with you, and that has not changed. Chapter 4. The Wedding in the Ruins. A month later, the late summer sun slanted through the broken arches of the old abbey, painting the moss-covered stones in shades of gold and amber. Where once there had been a roof, there was now only a canopy of brilliant blue sky. Birds sang from the crevices, and wildflowers nodded their heads in the gentle breeze. It was, by any measure, an unconventional setting for a wedding. But for the small group gathered within the ruined chapter house, It was perfect. Clara stood at the entrance to the makeshift aisle, a carpet of grass and clover leading to where Leo waited. She was not wearing the magnificent gown of ivory satin. Instead, she wore a simple dress of cornflower blue muslin that matched her eyes, with a wreath of wild daisies and meadow flowers in her hair. She looked less like a bride at a society wedding and more like a spirit of the place itself, returned home at last. Leo's breath caught in his throat as he watched her walk towards him, leaning lightly on the arm of old Thorn, who had insisted on the honour of giving her away. He had never seen anything so beautiful. Her face, no longer pale with fear, was glowing with a quiet, joyful confidence. Standing with Leo was his mother, Lady Agatha. The initial shock and scandal of the aborted wedding had long since been replaced by a grudging admiration for Clara's courage and a deep and abiding fury at Percival Graves, a fury she shared fully with her son. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, declaring the whole thing the most romantic and dreadfully damp occasion she had ever attended. A handful of others were present: the Thorns, the doctor who had tended Clara, and a few of the Blackwood tenants who had helped in the search and had come to love the quiet, kind young woman the Baron was so clearly devoted to. The clergyman, a friend of Leo's from Oxford, who asked no questions and kept no parish register of the scandal, stood before them, his book open. He began the familiar, ancient words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered together here in the sight of God." Clara looked up at Leo. His grey eyes were soft, filled with a love so profound it made her heart ache. She thought of that terrible morning, less than 5 weeks ago, when she had stood in a gilded cage of a room, looking at a dress that felt like a shroud. She had been so alone then, so convinced that sacrifice and flight were her only options. She had been wrong. The only way to protect the man she loved was to trust him, to let him share her burdens, her shame, her fears. He had proven that, not with grand gestures, but with steadfastness, with fury on her behalf, and with a gentle, unwavering faith in her. "If either of you know any impediment, why ye may not be lawfully joined together in matrimony, ye do now confess it." The words hung in the air. Once they would have felt like an accusation. Now they were a simple formality. The only impediment had been her uncle's greed, and that had been exposed and dealt with. The scandal had been contained, as Leo had promised. Percival Graves, hounded by his creditors and shunned by polite society, had fled to the continent, a ruined and broken man. The Ashby estate, meagre as it was, now belonged solely to Clara, free and clear. "I, Leo, take thee, Clara." His voice was strong and sure. As he spoke his vows, he placed a ring on her finger, not the large ornate diamond that had been his mother's, but a simple ancient gold band he had found while exploring the abbey as a boy. It felt right, a piece of this place, a piece of their story. "I, Clara, take thee, Leo." Her own voice was clear as a bell, echoing softly off the ancient stones. She meant every word, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. They had already faced a version of those trials, and they had emerged stronger. When the final blessing was spoken, and the clergyman pronounced them man and wife, Leo cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a gentle, reverent kiss that spoke of promises kept, and a future, finally, blissfully, their own. The small congregation burst into applause, Thorn's "Hurrah!" loudest of all. Later, as they stood together in a shaft of golden light, looking out over the rolling hills of their estate, Clara leaned her head against Leo's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, his arm tightening around her. "For coming to find me, for not giving up, for believing in me." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You tried to run away to save me from a debt. It was the maddest, most wonderful thing. How could I not come after you?" He was quiet for a moment, then gestured with his chin towards the ruined walls. This is where you were found. This is where our real story began. It seemed the only place to properly start the rest of it. Clara looked at the ancient stones, now glowing warmly in the evening light. She remembered the cold, the fear, the despair of that corner. It was hard to believe it was the same place. It felt hallowed now, a sanctuary. "A new beginning," she murmured. "A life," he corrected gently. Together. Hand in hand, they walked out of the ruined abbey and into the sun